we're going to talk about here is our focus topic. And again, just reminding people, we always start off with a little roundup of things that have happened generally that impact the dairy industry in the last quarter. And then we talk about some specific topic. This time, we're going to go over the federal milk marketing order reforms that occurred in 2025. This has been a long, drawn-out process, and this is certainly not new news, so to speak. But we haven't really done one where we've just run over exactly what happened now that it's done. And I'm going to hopefully have an easier way for people to understand what some of these provisions are about, just by sort of making it as simple as possible. Because I know the difficulties grasping the complex terminology and equations involved, are things that you don't really have to master all this intimate detail. You got to know the big picture. So I'm going to try to get to that. All right, now quickly running through a few things here. Here's our agenda. We'll focus again on the FFMO reform that occurred, and technically the order, there's the link to the Federal Register site. It was published in January 17th of 2025, so the beginning of this year, becomes effective June 1st last month, except the actual pricing provisions for the class prices and then some of these component pricing issues that pieces of the equation, so to speak, that produce that class price. Those are all delayed until December 1, technically. So there'll be some ramp up there because some of the things are changing, like reporting that is then used in some of these pricing calculations. So they got to have some ramp up time. Okay, now, just to recap, we have had prior quarterly dairy legal webinars on this topic, but they go back quite a ways. The last time we talked about the actual amendment or the reform efforts was July 18th of 2023, and that's when things were kind of hot and heavy in terms of lots of people saying they wanted to file petitions, and there was a lot of things flying around, but everything hadn't been set yet in terms of the hearing process and everything. Well, now we're out the other end of it all, and we'll talk about that. And then the very first one we did on this was one of the very first one of these quarterly dairy legal webinars that we ever did, where we had Andy Novakovic from Cornell, Wisconsin. No, drawing a blank. Sorry, Andy. And he was our guest for that one. That was back in April of 2021. Okay, second thing on the sort of housekeeping is that we have a thing on our website called the Dairy and Dairy Products Law Virtual Resource Room. And it was put together a couple of years back. And here on the left-hand side of this slide, you'll see the various tabs that exist in that virtual resource room for your own, sort of research when you might want to be looking something up. There's all the tabs. It's something that we've always wanted to do an update for, and we have a student this summer who's working on an update. She's from Vermont, or she's actually from Vermont Law School, but she's from a dairy farm family in New York State. And she is working on that as we speak. And sometime in the next month or two, we will have an update coming of our dairy virtual resource room. And of course, we have a lot of other virtual resource rooms on our website. Okay, let's catch up on one more topic, which is everybody always wants to know, and it's an important topic to know. I figured I would do a catch up on something that we covered not too long ago, which is HPAI, highly pathogenic avian influenza, and the strain that is affecting dairy cattle. And just basically going to tell you the total numbers as of right now. Just pulled this stuff together from yesterday's numbers on the USDA's website. So just to give you a peek at where things stand right now, in the total outbreaks since the beginning, which would have been, I'm trying to remember the first, was it the spring of 24 or the spring of 23? The years go by fast. In any event, 1,075 confirmed cases of HPAI in dairy cattle. We've had it back and forth here on this, I think on this very webinar, maybe it was on a different one where we talked about, is that individual cows or is that actual farm locations. And I do believe that that is the correct interpretation is that that is farm locations. So there have been 1,075. I would listen to someone else who had a counter opinion because the last time my opinion was that that was cows. Someone corrected me. Okay, in 17 total states, and here's the total states, so you get a picture in case you haven't, heard or looked at this for a while. It's been very slow. The last 30 days, there's only been 2 cases, one in California and one in Arizona. And if you go back a little further than that, they don't make it capable of running a report from their sort of interactive map other than total outbreak in 30 days. But you go back a little bit before the last 30 days, and there is again one in Idaho here or there, but things have clearly slowed down except for California, which certainly has its hands full and has had its hands full since this all started. And just to give you an idea of how full their hands are, here's California's total number, 768 dairy operations with at least one positive. Idaho is second with 107, Colorado 64, Texas 29. You can see the gradations of blue getting lighter here. Michigan 31. That's certainly, a little bit of a standout there. And, of course, is right across that Lake Erie from us. Luckily, not a lot of cow-to-cow transportation across Lake Erie between Michigan and PA, thankfully. And then Ohio had 1 and North Carolina had 1. So Eastern Seaboard over here, Mid-Atlantic states, we're still fairly far away from, anything particularly close except Michigan. Obviously, Michigan has had, a not enjoyable time dealing with this and kind of, took a bolt of lightning there. It's easy to understand, maybe Texas, Colorado, Idaho, California, but, Michigan just drew the bad card, shall we say. So that's the status of the HPAI in dairy cattle. I think we had a goat or 2, but we haven't had other species. It does seem that the virus has not had more mutations that are increasing its ability to transfer from cow to cow, let's just say. And so we know that the cow's ability to transfer it back to other animals has increased by a certain mutation, but not the cow-to-cow transmission, if I have that correctly, and certainly not the human transmission. We're still in the human cases, in the small numbers. I think we're in double digits, but not that far into double digits. Okay, and I think it's still only 1 death, but in any event, don't quote me on those last ones. My point is I wanted to give you some cow numbers. Okay, now, dairy forward pricing. Chloe already talked about this, and I kind of missed that in the grand scheme of things here. So I had a slide on it too. And this is my last piece of little housekeeping before we get right into the FMMO reform. But this goes along with FMMO reform because, because of no farm bill is why this needed to be done, because the dairy forward pricing system, and I'll explain what that really means, in the simplest terms in a second. The dairy forward pricing system is authorized in each, successive farm bill. So without a farm bill, this needed to happen some way or other. Otherwise, processors who wish to do dairy forward pricing, let's just say, would not have had any legal authority to do so. Because dairy forward pricing, what it is it is authorization to disregard the minimum pricing in the federal order system for fluid milk. And because that's the biggest, that's the mandatory part of the federal pricing system for fluid milk. And then the what's going on here is that various entities out there in the world were given the authority, and that authority has been reauthorized here to essentially purchase milk in a different way than the federal system would dictate. And this is an exception that is essentially created strictly for the purpose of entities that are engaging in essentially their own branding, like a large retailer that has their own brand of sour cream and and other types of soft products, that would be this like class 2 products, and things of that nature. And so the bottom line is it's an exception for large mostly retailers that have house brands, and then they want their own name on there rather than somebody else's name, and they are guaranteeing that seller, uh, whether it's a co-op or whatever it may be, they're guaranteeing them a large volume to feed, to make these house labeled, white labeled as they call them, products for these entities, and therefore those buyers are getting an exception from having to pay, and are, well, put it this way, an exception from having to go through the federal milk marketing order system of pooling. So, and we'll talk about all that in a second. But anyway, that's the relevance of the dairy forward pricing program. Um, I hope I didn't gum that up too badly for anyone. And by the way, keep in mind that these webinars are for still at an entry level understanding. We don't want to get too technical that we lose people here. And as the old joke goes, it's, you can count on one hand the number of people that really understand milk pricing in the state of Pennsylvania. So sometimes I'm on the one side of that, sometimes I'm on that one hand, sometimes I'm not. So anyway, okay, now we're back to our regular agenda here, which is the FFMO order reform. Okay, we're all familiar. I'll make a little bit of an assumption that, if you're here, you're familiar enough that there is the federal system and you know that it exists. And of course, right now it consists of 11 separate milk marketing orders that pertain to these specific regions shown on the map. Have been many more in the past, and many and things have morphed and been revised over the decades since the system came into being in approximately the late 1930s in its beginning forms. These are the 11 federal milk marketing orders. And the unique thing about this, or maybe not totally unique, but somewhat unique thing about this particular reform effort is that it was a massive reform of all 11 federal orders simultaneously. Certain equations and certain provisions that are used in these marketing order regions were across the board amended uniformly for every region. Now, maybe there's some little twist that was left. There are a couple little things that are unique to certain regions that still probably exist. I'm sure they do. But this was a request from the USDA to amend all 11 identically. And that was, in fact, of course, successful. We're here because, of course, this reform effort actually took place. Okay, now, here's the basic stats on the reform effort. Petitions that were acted upon were finalized in May or June of 2023. There were some earlier versions that were amended, and then that May to June of 23 was when essentially the set requests or the requests being made were set. And there was 10 separate petitioners technically in these proceedings. 49 days of hearings between August 23rd of 23 and January 30th of 24. And there was technically 21 proposals that were on the table for consideration from those 10 petitioners. There were many more proposals, some of which were not acted upon, but 21 were acted upon, either granted or denied in some way, shape, or form. There was the recommended decision took essentially about a year between August of 23 when the beginning of the hearings to July 1st of 24, a little less than a year, and then or you might want to say 10 months, a little tad more than 10 months. The recommended decision came out. Technically, it was published in the Federal Register on July 15th. Then the final decision after public comment on the recommended decision was published in the Federal Register on December 2nd of 2024. It was released in the month before that. Then the final rule was issued on January 17th of 2025. So the recommended decision was the adjudication of the petitions. Then when the final decision was issued, of course, there needed to be referendum votes. The referendum votes all passed. I think these two bullet points, I should have flipped their order here. And then, so then that kicked in or cleared the way for the actual final rule, which was the actual amendment of the FFMO regulations to match the final decision on the petitions. And so that was all finalized again, January 17th of 2025, published in the Federal Register. After 11 referenda, I guess is the plural, after 11 referenda were passed. And then again, the effective date is June 1, except for the various calculations in the class pricing, which some of which, go back a little further, and I'll go through that in a minute, that come into play in December 1st. Now, I'm going to go through and show you where there's some good resources, and then we'll get right to the meat of it. Okay, so good resources. Here's obviously, this is the proposed decision from July of 24, and then here's the actual final decision from December of 24. And, there's links to them here, of course. And then the text of the amended regs were published as the final rule, and here's what it looks like. And here's the link to it across the top here. And so they didn't have to do a proposed rule because it was a decision that had already had public comment. The decision was, we've had an adjudication. Here's how we propose to amend the rules. The regulations, I should say, for all 11 federal milk marketing orders. And then when the actual when the actual amendment occurs, then it doesn't need a proposed stage with another public comment section. It's already been voted on by the producers as the way that it works under this ag marketing order authorization from the late 1930s, and so it was just, they went right to the final rule, and this is the link to it. Okay, we will get to the merits. Hang tight for a minute. And then the other good resources that are out there is, of course, the USDA's Ag Marketing Service website. They have just an exhaustive set of goes from one home page with the link right here on the top bullet point of the slide. And then they have just everything you could imagine in there. Most of the briefs and pleadings and other things from the hearings, also, the transcripts, all kinds of things. Another great resource is there's a webinar that was done in November of 24, which was explaining the proposed decision, and that webinar is viewable right off of the USDA's website also. So I figured that's a good thing to throw in there. Now, a couple of things from sort of the academic world or others, the industry. There's a University of Wisconsin-Madison extension publication by this gentleman named Leonard Polzin, and excellent, sort of survey or analysis, let's say, of the entire final decision. He also did an earlier article with the summary of the proposed changes before the final. So there's really two articles here that are excellent. There's also a really nice thing from a company called Terrain, and this is another sort of summary and analysis of the new provisions. Terrain is a sort of an analytics consultant contractor for the farm credit system. And that's who wrote this particular resource. And then lastly, American Farm Bureau Federation, Daniel Munch, their in-house or part of their in-house economist team, wrote a very nice, and he's written several of them, but a real nice sort of final conclusion about from proposed to final, going through, and there's all sorts of good graphics in there, which I wanted to put in here, but then I thought, nah, I'm just going to confuse you if I start going too far. Okay, now, so let's lay a little foundation so you can understand what's in here. So I do it this way. People's eyes glaze over, when they start hearing these terms and the topic. So I'm just trying to make it as simple as possible. How do you make it as simple as possible? You answer one question that directs the entire explanation, which is, why do we have these marketing orders in the first place? Well, the reason that we have these marketing orders in the first place is very simple. The objective is to spread the benefit of higher class 1 fluid milk prices and revenue across to more producers, so that the producers who get the benefit of supplying some portion of their milk to the fluid market don't get a higher price than their neighbor who had no ability to control it, but his milk might have gone to cheese instead. So because the producer doesn't have any control over the utilization of the milk, and the pricing is all based upon what class it's going to be utilized for, because that's what produces the sales revenue. And they sell for different products sell for different rates. The bottom line is, let's take the benefit that's accorded by the highest price that we have, which is fluid milk, and let's spread it across all producers so that no one is getting more than somebody else simply by happenstance, or some other luck of the draw that their milk is being used for fluid and somebody else's isn't. Because quality of milk in these days isn't quite as wide as it was at one time. Most don't want to overstate it, but the milk used for class 4 butter is on the quality scale not appreciably different than the milk that's used for class 1 fluid. So let's create a system where they all get paid, everyone gets paid the same. Well, how does that work? Well, it works by these market-wide mandatory pools of class 1 revenue, all of the revenue that comes from fluid milk sales, plus at the producer's option, the milk that's utilized for other classes can be included in the pool also. And then there's a monthly system essentially of setting a price. That there's an advance price, which is kind of like a price before that month's entire set of transactions in wholesale milk have been completed, and then there's a truing up period after the books on that month are closed, so to speak, and the monthly milk check for each producer, their actual producer price milk check, not the advance price milk check, the actual final producer price milk check, trues the whole thing up so that they, depending on what their advance price was, they will either get a little bit more if it's needed to bring them up to the one uniform price for everybody in that region whose milk has been pulled together, or they might on the books get a little bit less on their total monthly output because maybe they got a higher price at first, and then the whole region maybe was large on butter production that particular month, and therefore had a little bit less gross revenue, so to speak. So the bottom line is, you're just truing up all the producers with one uniform producer price once all the transactions for that month can be dealt with, and the accounting can be done to say how much milk moved through this region within this, and what was the pooled revenue for all that milk that moved through this region, and then we will make sure that everyone's getting essentially a similar or the same per hundredweight price for that raw unprocessed milk that was delivered to the plant. Okay, so you get that one uniform blend price or producer price. That's the whole point of this entire exercise. So that's as much as you need to know to understand this. Now, again, just to go through the utilization classes, class 1's fluid, class 2 is the soft products, all of the sour creams and the yogurts and the cottage cheese and all that. Class 3 is the hard cheeses, which is even some soft cheeses. It's the classically what we would call your standard cheese products. And then class four, butter and powdered products. And again, the market pays more for one, two, three, four. Four is the lowest priced, revenue producer, or those products produce less revenue per hundredweight of milk. Usually, we'll just say, because there have been problems. Okay, now this is when you look at that, then okay, here's the simple explanation of the pooling system and what the federal system or federal order system is meant to do. It's taking, here's the, in the middle here, you got the order pool. Let's just take it as, Federal Milk Marketing Order, 3. I'm just making up a number there, just pulling one out of the air. All the milk that moves through for which the processors have agreed to pool the milk, then and class one is mandatorily pooled. The other classes are optionally pooled by the producer, or by the processor's decisions. It's a kind of a whole issue into itself. The bottom line is you create that pool of revenue, and class one producing the most revenue, and then you're essentially dividing that up and creating a uniform price per hundredweight that ultimately ends up being the farm price. But they get it in two sort of the accounting for it in two steps. One is the advance price, and then one is any additional accounting that needs to be not done to bring either what they've received for their gross amount of milk up, or maybe it goes down a little bit because their advance price was heavy on the class one utilization in that region. So all right, so bottom line, you get the 4 classes of utilization. You get the order pool that produces one blended price to the farm. Now, we're going to add one little thing into this. We're going to add these commodity prices. So the class system, or actually we're going to add 2 things in here, sorry. The class system is what produces the pool, which then produces the uniform price to all the farmers by mixing the revenues from these different classes. And then, essentially truing it all up. Now, to arrive at the prices for these classes, the advance prices for these classes, because in the end, actually I shouldn't say that. It's to arrive at the prices both advanced and the final prices, for the production of some of these classes of products. The system has been created, and it wasn't all that long ago, a couple decades ago. There was this component system that was the way in which these classed products and this volume of milk, how the pricing is established. So in other words, and if you follow the arrows here, you're going to be able to see what we're talking about. For class 3, which is cheese, it's the equation. You don't have to know the equation. You just have to know that there's a butterfat component that goes into it. There's a protein component that goes into it. And there is the other solids, which are, not the protein solids, that go into the class 3 price. So these arrows running from component to class are just ways to express this is part of the equation that produces the final prices for each one of these classes in that region, which are then all sort of evened out by the pooling, and then the checks go out with hopefully a blend price that evens out the disparity between dairy farmers based upon the decision they had nothing to do with, which is what class of product is their milk used for. Now, so there's this component pricing, which is how these class prices get made or get arrived at by component pricing. Then there's some of these commodity prices that feed into, you see all these arrows just go here, they feed into how the components are priced. So the bottom line is everything to the left, of the class price, just understand that's math. Those are components of a mathematical equation that arrives at a class price for these various, I think I have it here. No, these various products. Okay, now we're going to do one more thing, which is this is the same diagram, except these other terms are now added to this column where the component pricing was, because these are various other parts of the equation, at least in class 1 and class 2. That's where these terms are used. They're just more of the equation, the mathematical equation that feeds into establishing these prices. So here's what we're going to do now. That's the truing up process. I'm going to skip over that for now. Now, here's the 5 things that the reforms did. And what I'm going to do is we're going to look at them, and then I'm going to show you where in that chart these things come from, or where they're found in that chart, which tells you, oh, it's just part of the equation that makes up the class 3 price, or it's just part of this term, this thing they're talking about is part of the equation that makes up the class 1 price, or whatever it may be. That's all you need to know. You don't need to know all these details of it. Just know that there are these equations, and different terms and different facts contribute to the equations to produce those final prices for each class, which is then all trued up so that there's a one blend price ultimately for all the producers whose milk went into the pool. All right, now, first, they updated the skim milk composition factors to, and then there's some various factors here, and with a delayed implementation, that's that. Okay, that's that December date. So where is that? That is right here. That's just a tweak to how the class 1 price is ultimately determined. And again, I have these little red numbers showing you where in the chart this particular change took effect. This first one we're talking about takes effect for the determination in the equation of the class 1 price. All right. Now, next, removing 500-pound barrel cheddar cheese prices from the reporting program, but where that comes into everything is cheese prices here end up being used to develop a protein price, which then ends up being, a component of the class 3. Of the class 3 cheese price or cheese utilization price. So the bottom line is this other thing about the barrels of cheese, which are not really traded like they once were, and was not a good source of, sort of market dictated pricing. So that's where this goes. It's just a tweak to the through line of this equation to develop the class 3 price. That's all. That's all this is. Now, next, went the right way. Okay, updating the class 4 and class 3 manufacturing allowances for cheese, butter, etc. Okay, what's that? What are these manufacturing allowances, or they call them make allowances? That is just in the equation for, in the equation for determining class 3 prices, we have, and again, that's cheese, we have various tweaks that were made to other parts of that equation. We already talked about one before. That's all this number 3 is a change in the class 3. Actually, it's class 3 and class 4 manufacturing allowances, which is a manufacturing allowance is how much does it take on average for the processor to make this product so that they can take those costs out of the equation that determines what the price is to the farmer. There has to be an allowance in the total revenue for, what did the processor have to spend in addition to just the milk to produce that ultimate, pound of cheese, so to speak. So that's what a make allowance is. It's the price the processor has to contribute to making a pound of cheese over and above, the milk that would be contained in there. All right, and then the the last two, uh, slightly different issues here. Let me just see. Okay. So 4 is this was the one that was the biggest need and it was the drove this whole reform effort, which was there had been a tweak to the class 1 price that kind of backfired, did not pan out well. And it had been made in the 2018 Farm Bill rather than through a petition process like this. And it had to be undone because of some real weird issues that occurred during COVID, where the cheese price was starting to actually become higher than the fluid milk price. Um, and and that was because there was this program for the U.S. government purchasing cheese reserves and to try to keep the dairy market economically sound, let's just say. And therefore there was sort of this demand for cheese all of a sudden. So cheese ended up the cheese utilization price went up because there was so much demand for it. So the bottom line is for number 4, wait a minute, where are we at here? Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, so for number 4, that was again simply a tweak to the class 1 price. And this is actually part of it. Let me see. I want to look and see them up into the adoption. Yeah, okay. Oops, sorry. Yeah, okay. So I think it's best to just put it this way. This number 4 was a tweak at this level, and number 5 was just a tweak at this level, again, factoring in or changing the equation ever so slightly for a class 1 price. So the bottom line with all of this is, and I'm just about done, the bottom line for all of this is if you understand the basics of what's going on to the right of my cursor, everything to the left of my cursor is simply, it's just math. These are just all components of various equations. And they got tweaked in a couple places, and then the actual class pricing equations got tweaked in a couple of places. Now, again, this one here, this last issue here was one of the largest problems that needed to be addressed in the reform. And just to remind you about what happened there, this was the situation where had the 2018 Farm Bill change that was made in that particular class 1 pricing portion of the equation for class 1 pricing, essentially dairy producers would have made over the course of just this period shown here, once we went below the break-even point, this is a compilation up to the end of, or excuse me, the beginning of January, the beginning of 2023, $918 million in lost revenue because the tweak that was made to this equation or this particular terminology and this calculation that contributed to the class 1 price backfired. And that's backfired because cheese demand went way up because of this government purchases, that were occurring during COVID. So the bottom line is, again, all you have to know is that these are changes to the math that goes from left to right to produce these class prices, which, as you remember the other chart, goes out to the farm ultimately after a blend price has been created. So that is it.
Excellent. All right. Well, that's I think that's all we've got for today. So thanks, Brooke, so much. Join us later this month for ADA compliance for agritourism operations, or next month for foreign agricultural land ownership laws. Register for the symposium. We'd like to see you in person. And everyone have a great week and an even better weekend. Thanks all.